This crazy entitled grandma thinks that she owns a communal backyard. But she's not just crazy, she's dangerous. As we learn, she has a sinister plan for her neighbor's cats. Happy birthday if today's your birthday, and on with the show. A little backstory before we jump into the main bit. My parents split up when I was 2, and both immediately paired up with the nightmares I would then be stuck with for the next 16 years. Both of my parents' new partners were horribly abusive in different ways, but this story focuses on my real-life wicked stepmother. We'll call her Vanessa. Something you should know about my father is that he was not an involved parent. Before me, he had 2 other children with different women that he never saw. So it made sense when my parents broke up that I went to live with my mum. She made a lot of bad choices, but we actually had a relationship and I felt like she loved me. My dad and I, however, did not have a close relationship at all. When he started dating Vanessa, we met and she seemed normal enough, but after they got married, things started to change. Vanessa hated my mother, maybe because she was younger, maybe because she was more attractive, maybe because she was my dad's ex, or maybe it was just because Vanessa was a truly hateful person. But the reason doesn't matter. What does matter is that after marrying my dad, Vanessa had it out for my mum. What's one of the worst things you can do to a mother? Take her child and turn that child against them. And that is exactly what Vanessa tried to do. She convinced my dad to take my mum to court to rip me away from my family. The courts eventually decided to give primary custody of me to my father because my mother had 2 other children, one with a disability, and my dad and Vanessa made more money. Vanessa did try for a long time to turn me against my mother, but I was utterly devoted. My mum and her other 2 and then 3 children were the only family I had ever known, and I loved them with everything I was. No amount of trash talking my other family or trying to win me over were successful. So when Vanessa realized she couldn't hurt my mother that way, she tried another tactic. She was going to treat me as badly as she legally could and rub it in my mum's face. This is where the story actually starts. My mum was very gothy, and I idolized her, so naturally I wore as much black as I was allowed to, and was very excited to grow up and have dyed gothy hair and tattoos and tons of piercings. When I was 10 years old, my mum bought me my very first bottle of semi-permanent black hair dye. I was so excited, but I told her, "Mum, I don't think Vanessa will let me dye my hair. She wants me to look normal for church. She won't even let me wear black clothes on Sunday." My mum's response was something along the lines of, "Vanessa can eat a big fat weenie. If this is what you want, this is what we're going to do. Don't ever let people like her tell you who you are allowed to be, or what you're allowed to look like. You are your own person." And I felt that in my heart. Vanessa hated everything about what made me the person I was anyway. How much worse could black hair possibly make it? Never ask how much worse a situation can get, guys, because the universe will be there, winding up the most wicked curveball you've ever seen to show you just how much worse it can get. And that's exactly what happened. I returned to my father's home with sleek, shiny blue-black hair, soft and thick all the way down past my waist, and Vanessa ordered my dad to take me to the barber and have it all shaved off. My father took me and held me down while I kicked and screamed and cried, "No, please don't cut my hair!" while the barber gave me a buzz cut. I was traumatized. My mum was traumatized. And Vanessa hated dragging an already masculine little girl to church with no hair. But over time I adjusted and decided to use it against Vanessa. I never grew my hair out a normal girl's length again, and bleached and dyed it every color under the sun, because what's the worst she could do to me? Shave it off? Hair is often a very personal thing for most people. It's such a visual way in which you express a bit of your personality. Obviously Vanessa here is a complete monster, but I think by extension, the dad and also the barber are to blame here. I mean, how could you go and shave someone's head while they're screaming like that? Obviously they don't want it to happen and they're not giving their consent. I don't know, I would just say, sorry lady, go find another barber. The backstory. Many years ago, in the late 90s, my grandma lived in a trailer park. My mum and my dad were supposedly working on their issues, so almost every week I'd take a trip to grandma's house and spend it there. My grandma took in a cat around when I was born. I forget what breed exactly, but it was very fluffy. The kitty she took in ended up being called something like Galaxia. Grandma learned quickly that the kitty she took in was also very pregnant. Grandma helped Galaxia through the birth and gave many of the kitties away. Grandma kept Galaxia, the kitty that ended up being mostly black, and the kitty I insisted to help take care of. Mars is the kitty that was mostly black, and Venus was my kitty. They got along very well. I tried convincing my parents to let them into our home. Of course, a toddler can't really speak that well, but due to basically living in an apartment and the fact Mom and I are allergic to them, I was always told no. Grandma took care of Venus and Mars for me. I only very vaguely remember my history with these kitties, as I was very young, but my mum talks about my first cat a lot, since they were important to me at the time. Despite my allergies, I've almost always had a cat. The neighbor. My grandma lived in a cul-de-sac of trailers. There was one huge backyard that all the neighbors shared. There was a fence at the end of the trailer park to keep you out of the woods. My grandma was not the only person who had cats, but she did her best to keep them all inside. Venus didn't like being an indoor kitty. She always found a way outside, but would be right at the door when grandma went to get the mail. Entitled Grandma, e.g., was one of those people that had pet cats. Her cats were not friendly to people and were quite territorial. I'm pretty sure they learned it from E.G. though, as E.G. used to scream at me for being in her backyard if I ever got too close to her trailer. Grandma and E.G. were next door neighbors. Eventually, my grandma ended up getting me some games to play inside, so I wouldn't be yelled at by her. I was pretty bad at handling being yelled at. I cried a lot when E.G. screamed at me, although, to be fair, I was probably only like 5 at the time. I remember one Saturday morning waking up to yelling. Grandma and Grandpa were one of those lovey-dovey old couples that don't even raise their voices at each other, so I was shocked and confused. I remember walking to the front door in my PJs to see Grandma and E.G. screaming at each other. I don't remember a lot. I remember Venus scampering past me and hiding under the couch. I also remember E.G. screaming something like, "If I ever see that darn cat eating my cat's food again, she will never eat again." I was absolutely horrified. I pulled on my grandma's nightgown, crying, and asking if the mean grandma was going to hurt Venus. I think my grandma said something like, "No, sweetie, she's just angry." We should have taken her more seriously. I remember weeks passing. E.G. stopped letting her cats outside, but left their food bowl out by her back door on her porch. E.G. stopped screaming at me for getting in her backyard. So much time passed without her screaming. Little me thought she just moved out. I asked Grandma about it. She told me that E.G. is likely still there, as her car never moves. Mars was never the kitty to go outside. I think because he was a black kitty. He already had people trying to hit him and learn to stay inside. But I remember waking up one morning to Mars making some unusual noises. It sounded like yowling, as he looked out the window in the living room. I look out the window to see Venus puking her little kitty guts out. First it was goo, then it was a bit more solid, and then it was obviously cat food. I panic and get my grandma. Grandma looks Venus over while my grandpa is calling my parents. What little I remember gets fuzzy, but this is what happened from what my mum told me. Apparently, once my parents showed up, I started yelling and crying that Venus's stomach was so upset she was crying too. I've heard that cats, when they're sick, will try crying out whatever's doing it. My parents get Venus into a kennel, but she's acting like she's on the verge of passing out, and she's wobbly when she moves. I remember telling Venus she's going to be okay and hugging the kennel. I was shaking. I do remember feeling that I knew it was over. Venus wasn't going to be okay. Venus was brought into the vet's ER. We sat there for as long as little kid me could before I broke down into a crying fit again. But the vet tech said that Venus was being treated and they'll call us with how it goes. I remember going back to Grandma's house for my things, but Mum tells me I was shaking so bad and crying so much, she just had me sitting on the front porch. Grandma kept me company, and EG came out of her house all smug. My heart sank when she yelled out the words, "I told you that darn cat would never eat again." My grandma immediately went over and started screaming in her face. I don't remember a lot since I broke down crying again. My dad had to pull Grandma away from the woman. Mum took us home. Grandma went into her house, but I remember her calling someone and waving at us while on the phone. The next morning, we got the call that Venus passed away. They cremated her and gave my parents her collar. My parents tried to teach a very young me about death and how it was okay now. Venus wouldn't feel sick in heaven. Venus isn't crying or throwing up in heaven. I didn't go to my parents' home the next weekend or the weekend after that. Our lease was up and we moved. Another weekend passes. My mum asks me if I would be okay with an older cat. Confused, I tell her I would be. Peter joins the family, an adult cat. Apparently he was old enough to be put down at the shelter, despite only being 2 or 3 years old. He had spent his entire life at that shelter. My parents were apparently trying to find me a kitten since I had been around Venus since around she was born. A couple more weekends pass, and I finally feel okay enough to go back to Grandma's. I'm heartbroken again seeing Mars look out the window, waiting for Venus to come home. But I try to stay excited about Peter. I tell Grandma about Peter. Grandma moves out of that awful trailer park once her lease is up and keeps taking care of those kitties until they pass away. Mum told me around when I was a teenager why EG thought she was within her right to poison all the cats in the neighborhood. Apparently it was because she was just adding rat poison to the bowl my cats eat out of. There's no law against poisoning my own cats. EG was never arrested for anything, and that never ceased to tick off my family. EG killed a couple more cats, and due to that, she got evicted. According to my mum, apparently she was screaming about where she was supposed to go as they forced her and her crap from her home. Because, "I'm just some old woman, I can't afford to live anywhere else, I can't even move my things." My mum told me. Eventually someone from EG's family showed up with a U-Haul and moved her and her things away. I really wish something worse happened to EG, but that's because she not only broke a little me's heart, she also broke a bunch of little old ladies' hearts, where their cat was their only companion. At least she got kicked out of there. That must have been so stressful for all the other cat owners in that property. You would feel like you can never let your cat out because this crazy old lady's trying to poison and kill your cat. This story started weeks after this gem back in 2007, where Mum cost me my job at NOAA. I couldn't say they had loved me there, but I was treated with a fondness as their first and then only student hire from community college. I had a cupcake hand-delivered to me by the department lead for my birthday, and on the last day I was there, someone had snuck out to the UC New Hire luncheon to get me a cake to see me off on my last day. I felt validated, worthwhile, and was treated like an adult for the first time in my life working there. I moped my way through the rest of my courses, scraping by with passing grades, and lay about the house through the weeks between spring and summer semester. I had never done the summer classes before, and didn't plan on it now when Mum decided once again to take offense. I was refusing to surrender my time to work in the garden with her. I wasn't talking about finding a new job, and I didn't seem to care about her arbitrary punishments, which I bet good money ticked her off the most. One week, I found myself much harassed to get dressed and shoved out the front door, with her a finger width shy of shouting that I needed to go to Copy Ninja to print my resume and don't come back until 4 PM. and that I better have applied to no less than 10 jobs that day. I found she had packed my purse and set it on the front mailbox. By this time, most places had a kiosk by customer service where you could apply online in store, and the only places that did same-day interviews weren't the kind of places that treated you with any kind of respect. Knowing it was pointless to argue this through the locked front door, I slumped to the bus to do as I was told. Every day for a week, I obediently went store to store trying to apply for work, and most of the time, I was directed online and never got an interview. Mum allowed me to tell her where I'd gone for a walk-in, and after the end of the week, that I must not be trying if I didn't have a job yet. Turns out, she expected me to walk into no less than 10 stores a day and interview like when she was a girl, when things were less expensive and technology hadn't streamlined a lot of employment processes. Week 2 of being kicked out daily, I found that I could better spend my time going to 3 different public libraries and to spend an hour at each on the internet applying for entry-level positions, as I had a membership card. Still, no interviews. Since it was summer, this was also the only consistent air conditioning I had, and I'd taken to sneaking a snack from home and buying a single meal from a fast food place a day, so I wouldn't starve. Found out I had a limit on my debit card when meals were being declined, and I walked into my bank's local branch to up the limit so I could continue to eat. Thank goodness the Mermaid Coffee Co. gave me free water, so I was able to stay hydrated. Week 3. I decided to go on campus to apply for work and found the library was open, and I could skim off a lot of travel time and apply for work on the internet efficiently. I had a student ID, so campus police assumed I had classes, but I was pretty much in the library from the time it opened to nearly 4 PM, with AC all day, every day, while I dug around for any tip or trick to making managers hire me after an interview. And I'd take small breaks for flash games, since all work and no play makes for dulled senses. Mum had taken to pulling the LAN cable that went to my room from the router to keep me from playing games, and somehow didn't seem to understand me telling her every day for weeks that places didn't want to walk in with a printed resume. All time spent on a computer for work, school, or coursework was gaming to her, and she would barge into whatever room she liked to glare at your screen and try and catch you at it, even though I was never as much an addict for PC games as my brother. She was convinced I wasn't really trying and promised that if I didn't have an interview soon, there'd be consequences. By week 6, Mum is quite upset. I seem to be neglecting the fast food industry. Because of my disability, I'm a liability in the kitchen and didn't have any food handling certification. Not only that, but I had some pride. If I was going to put myself in constant danger at work, I better be getting hazard pay, which was only for careers I was not qualified for, and that my disability would not allow. I'd gotten an interview by this time for a realtor's office, but they hadn't called me back for a second interview. I was trying. I really was. But as long as businesses don't say to your face that they aren't hiring you because of the unknown cost of accommodating a disability, they can leave you out of their hiring pool without repercussions. Meanwhile, my entitled brother Donald got to sleep all day, play games on the PS4, didn't have to help in the garden as he maliciously maligned every plant he touched. He only had to cook one meal for the family a week, while his parasitic boyfriend came over daily for free food and internet. He also chipped in on telling me what a failure I was during the whole ordeal, and parroted Mum's word at me without any opinion of his own, because he's a doormat to the most emotionally and mentally manipulative person in the immediate area. My eating habits meant I was losing weight, which would have been okay if the diet wasn't causing my anemia, iron deficiency, not the well-known deadly one, to flare up. I was emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausted as the deadline for this unspecified consequence loomed, and the interviews I had were being ignored in favor of this punishment. Doomsday arrived and I woke early to the sound of a bad morning. I found I didn't want to get out of bed. Not a choice I had, as Mum barged into my room and flipped me off my bed, drill sergeant style, before she began emptying clothes, intimate items, and socks into a suitcase. A woman who hadn't worked a paying job since 1993, while I had worked 4 since the early 2000s, was kicking me out as if it was the most normal thing ever. I had a large settlement from a car accident to my name, and I was out on the streets that same morning, looking like I was going to the airport, ears ringing with my mum's words to get a job or never return. I used a payphone to tell my girlfriend what had happened and that I was homeless. She was worried I'd kept this entire ordeal from her to this point, as confrontations like this worried her and caused her anxiety. She lived in her parents' house with her 2 little sisters in a 3-bedroom house with 2 medium-sized dogs. As tempting as it may have been to ask, I knew from when we hung out together that there was no room for another person. I can't remember how Dad found out what happened, as Mum threw me out while he was at his contractor's job, but I remember he found me a cheap hotel near the Marine recruitment base to stay in, for which I was grateful. The only comforts I had was the Nintendo DS and charger I'd hidden in the lining of my purse, my monthly bus pass, the Mermaid Coffee Co. water, and knowing that the people who really cared about me were worried. I stayed there for a week, paying $50 a day, getting a complimentary continental breakfast in the morning, my daily fast food, and snack that I bought from a dollar store as I labored, stressed, and cried, trying to fulfill Mum's requirements. On the second day of my exile, I got a visit from her with home-cooked food and a snide comment about how I'd made this so hard for myself by being lazy. Entitled person who thought they could leech off their parents. It hurts hearing that as I was the one going to college and who had slaved away for 2 months prior trying to find work, while my brother did exactly what she'd said with his parasite boyfriend who Mum loathed. After a week, I packed up and moved to another motel across the street, which didn't offer a complimentary breakfast, so I dropped back to 1 meal a day and 1 snack. I'd gotten Dad's work cell number, and he told me a time I could call him so we could talk, which I did to the best of my ability with the room phone. He promised to find a way for me to come home, and while I never wanted to be back under Mum's control, I was going through my settlement monies faster than I liked, as this new place was a fair bit more expensive. Dad delivered. I don't know how, but he got Mum to agree to let me come back if I signed up for fall semester and sent her a printout of the transcript. I am ashamed to say I took this escape from a homeless life and back into that dumpster fire of parents' care, but even then I'd learned things. She honestly didn't care if I medically was unsuited for certain types of work and was willing to put me at risk to achieve whatever selfish goal she had for these past few months. Her ideals on how to find a job were out of date, and she refused to admit that she was wrong or that times had changed. I knew I had to get out of that house. Mum was a creature of habit, and whenever she learned a new trick to get what she wanted, she resorted to overusing it to get whatever she wanted, regardless of the consequences to those around her. What makes this so crazy is that this mum just couldn't understand that they actually were trying, but there's just a different way to apply it for jobs now. Like, why have such a specific niche way of thinking that's how you're supposed to get a job? And only if you do it this very specific way, well then any other way is just illegitimate. The ironic thing is that I bet the mum thought they were trying to help them have a better life, and yet everything they were doing was a total setback. Submit your story to be read on the channel at VoiceyHereStories@gmail.com and join our Voicey veteran community at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.